My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 31 years old, and I thought this night would be simple. My sister Vanessa was getting married in Miami Beach, and no matter how strained things had been between us, I put on my best dress, drove hours to be there, and told myself I could at least play the role of the supportive sister. But the closer I got to the resort, the heavier the air felt, as if I was walking into something more than a wedding. The moment I arrived, the first cracks appeared. My mother's voice on the phone was cold, distant, as if I was bothering her. The staff at the entrance looked confused, flipping through the guest list over and over, my name nowhere to be found. Then came the final blow. The ballroom door locked tight right in front of me, while laughter spilled from inside. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a message. They wanted me outside, humiliated, erased. But what they didn't know was that I had already decided I wasn't going to let this be my story. That night, I made a choice, one that would set off a chain of events none of them could control. And by the time it was over, her perfect wedding would never be remembered the way she wanted it to be. I drove down I-75 with the radio low, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than I meant to. The sun was dipping behind the horizon as I crossed into Miami Beach, the lights of the city glittering like they were celebrating something I wasn't a part of. My emerald dress rested neatly on the seat beside me, pressed and ready, a dress I had chosen carefully so I could blend in, not stand out. I wanted to look presentable, like I belonged there, like any other sister attending her sibling's wedding. When I pulled into the parking lot of the Ocean Palm Resort, my chest tightened. The place looked like a palace. Fairy lights draped over palm trees swayed gently in the warm ocean breeze. A marble fountain gurgled in the courtyard, its water catching the golden glow of the overhead lanterns. Glass walls revealed a ballroom filled with laughter, music, and people in gowns and suits that sparkled under chandeliers. It was the kind of wedding that screamed money, the kind my family never let me forget Vanessa deserved. I took a deep breath, stepped out of my car, and smoothed down my dress. The fabric clung to me in all the right places, elegant but understated. Nothing flashy. I didn't want to compete. I wasn't here to steal the spotlight. I was here to play the part of the good sister, to smile, clap, and pretend we were a normal family. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked toward the entrance, my stomach twisting. At the check-in table stood a young woman in a navy blazer, her blonde hair tucked into a bun. Her smile was too polished, the kind you give when you're being paid to be nice. She held a tablet in her hand and greeted me warmly. "Name, please." "Lauren Mitchell." My voice caught, but I forced it steady. Her fingers tapped quickly on the screen. The smile faltered. She scrolled again, slower this time, her brows furrowing. "I'm sorry, I don't see you on the list." A hot flush crept up my neck. That can't be right. I'm the bride's sister. She glanced down, tapped again as if the name might magically appear, then looked back at me with a tight, pitying expression. "I really don't have you listed. Maybe you could call someone to confirm." I let out a small laugh, though my chest felt like it was collapsing. A mix-up, I told myself. It had to be. Of course I'll call. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my mother's number. Marilyn had texted me 2 nights ago with the kind of message that felt more like an order than an invitation. "Wedding Saturday. Be there by 6. No exclamation mark, no heart, no warmth. Just instruction. The phone rang twice before she answered, her tone sharp and impatient. "Lauren, what is it?" "I'm at the check-in table," I said as calmly as I could. "They're telling me my name isn't on the list. Can you clear this up?" There was a long pause, then a sigh heavy with annoyance. "Oh, Lauren, don't make a fuss. I'm sure it's just a glitch. Wait there, I'll send someone." "Mom, I'm standing outside. I can't get in. We're busy. Just wait." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone, the sting of her dismissal sinking deeper than I wanted to admit. My own mother didn't even have a minute for me. The woman at the desk avoided my eyes, pretending to be absorbed in her tablet, her sympathy radiating like heat. I hated that look. The same one teachers used to give me when they saw the star chart where Vanessa's name was always at the top and mine barely registered. The same look neighbors gave when they noticed I wasn't invited to the same parties as my sister. Always second best. Always forgotten. The click of heels against stone pulled my attention. My heart tightened as I turned and saw Vanessa gliding toward me. She looked like a magazine cover come to life, wrapped in a cream silk dress that probably cost more than my car. Her blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo, her makeup flawless. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew all eyes would follow her. "Lauren, what's going on?" Her tone was sugar, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "They say I'm not on the guest list," I said, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Do you know anything about that?" Her eyes widened with practiced innocence. "Oh no, that's awful. Must be a mistake. You know how hectic wedding planning is, so many details." She tilted her head slightly, her smile tightening. "Don't worry, I'll get it fixed." But she didn't move. She didn't call anyone over, didn't wave for the staff, didn't do a single thing. She just stood there with her arms folded neatly across her chest, waiting, watching me squirm. The realization hit me like a stone in my stomach. This wasn't a glitch, this was deliberate. My pulse hammered in my ears, my throat burning with words I wanted to hurl at her. I wanted to call her out, scream in her perfect face, demand to know how she could do this to her own sister. But the words never left my mouth. "Fine," I said instead, my voice low, steady. "I'll figure it out." Her smile widened just enough to reveal the truth behind it. "Good. Don't make a scene, okay? It's my day." With that, she turned and glided back toward the ballroom, her gown catching the light, every inch of her the perfect bride. The glass doors closed behind her with a soft click. I stood frozen in the humid night air, the laughter and music muffled on the other side of the glass. My vision blurred as the fairy lights twinkled above me, mocking. For a moment I thought about turning around, walking back to my car, and leaving them all behind. Let them celebrate their perfect wedding without me. Let them win. But something inside me clenched tight. Maybe it was pride, maybe anger. Or maybe it was the years of being told I wasn't enough, years of being pushed aside so Vanessa could shine. Whatever it was, it kept my feet planted on the stone path instead of retreating. This wasn't a mistake, it was a message. Vanessa wanted me humiliated, erased, invisible. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I walked back toward my car, my heels sinking slightly into the damp grass, each step heavier than the last. When I slid into the driver's seat, I sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel, the sound of music and laughter still drifting faintly from the ballroom behind me. My pulse was racing, my throat dry. For a few seconds, I pictured myself pulling out of that parking lot and driving 3.5 hours back to St. Petersburg. No one would notice, no one would care, and Vanessa would win. The thought made something inside me snap. I had been the forgotten one for too long, the quiet sister, the one who always gave in. Tonight, I was staring at the glass walls of a ballroom filled with people who thought I did not exist, and I realized I could not keep playing that part. If Vanessa wanted to lock me out of her perfect fairy tale, then I would be the one to shatter it from the inside. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling slightly, and scrolled to Emily Ross's contact. Emily had been my friend since college, the one person who always believed me when I said my family treated me like a shadow. She had taken the job at Ocean Palm Resort 2 years ago, and I knew if anyone could help me, it was her. I typed fast, my heart pounding as if the words themselves were dangerous. "I am locked outside of Vanessa's wedding. My name is not on the list. Can you help me get in?" I stared at the message for half a second before hitting send. For a moment there was nothing, just the faint echo of laughter from the ballroom and the sound of my own breathing. Then my phone buzzed with her reply. "Are you kidding me? Meet me at the side service entrance in 10 minutes. I will get you in." Relief flooded through me so fast it almost knocked the air from my lungs. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the humid Miami night wrap around me. I was not alone. When I opened my eyes, I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror. My face looked paler than I liked, my lipstick slightly smudged. I wiped it carefully and pressed my lips together, smoothing the color. My eyes looked sharp, almost unfamiliar, determined. I stepped out of the car and walked across the lot, moving quickly but trying to appear casual in case anyone saw me. The resort looked even more extravagant up close. The marble pillars gleamed under the spotlights, and the sound of a jazz band carried faintly from the ballroom. It felt surreal that I was sneaking around the edges of my sister's wedding like an intruder, but the thought only hardened my resolve. The service entrance was tucked behind a row of hibiscus bushes near the catering trucks. Emily was already there, leaning against the wall in her black blazer, a staff badge clipped to her chest. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, and the moment she saw me, her mouth pressed into a tight line. "Your sister is a piece of work, Lauren." She shook her head and pulled a key card from her pocket. "I owe you for this," I said quietly, stepping closer. "You owe me a drink," she muttered, swiping the card against the lock. The door clicked open and she held it for me. "But listen, you need to be careful. Vanessa has this place running like a fortress. She told the staff to make sure certain people did not get in." I am guessing she meant you. The words stung, even though they only confirmed what I already knew. I straightened my shoulders and stepped inside. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution, the polished floor reflecting the fluorescent lights above. I followed Emily, the sound of our footsteps echoing against the walls. "Why are you doing this?" she asked in a low voice, glancing back at me. "You could just walk away." "Because I am tired of walking away," I answered. My voice was firmer than I expected. "I have done it my whole life, Emily. Tonight it ends." She gave me a look, part worry, part admiration, then nodded. "All right. Just remember, this is Vanessa's wedding. Everyone in that ballroom is ready to clap for her. If you are going to do something, you better know exactly what you want." "I know." She stopped at a corner and pointed. "Beyond that door is the back corridor that leads to the main ballroom. You go in there and you are in the lion's den." I nodded, my hand brushing against the small clutch where I had tucked my phone. The weight of it reminded me that this was not just about slipping into a party. This was about exposing something. Emily squeezed my arm once before stepping back. "Text me if you need me. I will cover you as much as I can, but you are on your own once you are inside." I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The hum of voices, the clinking of glasses, and the swell of music poured into the hallway like a wave. For a moment, I stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching people dance under the chandeliers, watching Vanessa glide across the floor in her silk gown. She looked radiant, every inch the adored bride, the center of a universe that had always revolved around her. I felt that old ache in my chest, the one that came from being invisible, from watching my parents beam at her while barely glancing at me. But this time was different. I was not going to be the forgotten sister tonight. I was not going to fade into the background while she erased me from her story. I pulled my shoulders back and stepped forward into the light, the sound of my heels swallowed by the music, my heart hammering with a mix of fear and defiance. This was not Vanessa's flawless wedding anymore. This was the beginning of my plan. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, the chandeliers scattering diamonds across polished floors and sequined gowns. I moved along the edge of the room, careful to keep my head high, though every nerve in my body screamed that I did not belong. Servers weaved between the tables, carrying champagne flutes, their trays balanced like extensions of their arms. No one looked twice at me, not yet. Near the entrance stood an easel holding the seating chart, the kind of glossy calligraph design brides paid too much money for. I stepped closer, letting my eyes scan the rows of elegant script. There was the Mitchell family listed neatly beside the Parkers, the name of every cousin, aunt, and family friend, but mine was gone. Completely erased. Not even a courtesy spot at the far corner of the room. My stomach tightened as I forced myself to look across the ballroom. At the front, beneath an arch of white orchids, sat the head table. Vanessa glowed in her gown, her smile wide as if the world had finally bent to her will. Beside her was Ryan, handsome and polished, clinking glasses, with guests who leaned in to offer their blessings. And just to their right sat my parents. Marilyn wore a pale blue dress that shimmered like frost under the lights. Her back was straight, her smile polite but proud. Douglas leaned slightly toward her, his expression soft, almost deferential, as if he had long since given up having opinions of his own. Seeing them there, so comfortably part of the spectacle while I had been locked out in the dark, sent a sharp burn through my chest. My throat felt tight, but I forced my feet forward, weaving through the crowd until I reached their table. "Mom." My voice was steadier than I felt, though the word came out quieter than I intended. Marilyn's head turned. For a second, a flicker of something crossed her face, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced with an expression of cool irritation. "Lauren, what are you doing here?" I stood taller, ignoring the curious glances of a few guests nearby. My name was not on the list. "You knew that." She reached for her glass, her smile frozen, her voice pitched just above a whisper. "Do not make a scene. This is your sister's day." I blinked, disbelief fighting with the anger pulsing through me. "You had me locked out of my own sister's wedding. You erased me from the chart like I never existed." Her jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on the stem of her glass, swirling the liquid inside. "Sometimes it is better for everyone if certain people know when to step aside." My stomach dropped, the words cutting deeper than I expected. I turned toward my father, searching for something, anything that resembled the man who used to hold my bike steady when I was 6. The man who taught me to tie a tie before my first job interview. "Dad, say something." Douglas shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hand tightening around his fork. His eyes met mine for a second, then dropped to his plate. The silence was worse than any rejection. My pulse thundered in my ears, my fists clenching at my sides. I felt the weight of the room pressing down, the music, the laughter, the polished smiles. To them I was invisible, an interruption at best, an inconvenience at worst. For a moment, I considered screaming, hurling every painful truth I had swallowed for years across the table. But I caught Vanessa's laugh rising over the band, her perfect image gleaming under the chandeliers, and I understood something I had not before. This was not about lashing out in the heat of anger. If I wanted to break through the walls they had built around her perfect life, I needed to be deliberate. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay even. "I am not going anywhere." Marilyn's smile twitched, almost cracking, but she recovered quickly, turning back to Ryan as if I had already dissolved into the air. I stepped back, my heart pounding, fighting the sting behind my eyes. I would not let them see me cry, not tonight. The bitterness inside me hardened into something sharper, steadier. I thought of the text I had sent Emily, the promise I had made to myself in the car. If they wanted me invisible, they would soon regret it. I would not be buried quietly. I would not be erased again. The music swelled, a trumpet cutting through the chatter, and I stood there at the edge of the ballroom, my rage settling into cold determination. Tonight was not about acceptance. Tonight was about being seen, whether they liked it or not. The sound of the trumpet faded into the chatter of guests and the clinking of silverware, but my mind was already far away, pulled backward into a memory I had buried for years. It was 2012, the summer heat of Tampa pressing through the windows of our small living room when the letter arrived. A thick white envelope with the crest of a university I had dreamed of since I was a teenager. I could still feel the way my hands trembled as I tore it open, the disbelief turning into joy as I read the words over and over. Full academic scholarship. A chance to leave, to build something of my own, to prove that I was more than just the quiet shadow standing behind Vanessa's spotlight. I remember running to the kitchen where Mom was making coffee and Dad was reading the paper. I held the letter high like a trophy, breathless, unable to hide my grin. Dad stood up immediately, his face lighting up with the kind of pride I had always chased. "That is incredible, Lauren. You worked for this, you deserve every bit of it." But before I could even finish reading the letter aloud, Marilyn set down her mug with a sharp clink against the counter. Her eyes narrowed, her voice calm but firm in a way that left no room for argument. "That is wonderful, but you know Vanessa just applied to the same school. Without a scholarship, we will have to figure out how to pay for her tuition." The joy in my chest faltered. I looked at her confused. "But Mom, this is my scholarship. It covers everything." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that always made me feel small. "Your sister is older. She has the better chance of making something of herself if she gets the right education. You're smart, you'll do fine anywhere." The words sank like stones in my stomach. Dad opened his mouth as if to protest, his brow furrowed, but Marilyn shot him a look that cut the air between them. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging as he sank back into his chair. "I tried to fight, I really did. I begged them to let me take the scholarship I had earned, told them I could not just give it away. But every plea was met with the same wall of reasoning. Vanessa is the future of this family. Vanessa needs it more. Vanessa has potential you will never match. A week later, the decision was final. The paperwork was somehow transferred, the scholarship gone from my hands into hers. I ended up enrolling at a small state college hours away, cheap enough to cover with loans and part-time work. While Vanessa moved into a bright dorm room with glossy new books and weekend parties, I stocked shelves in a grocery store until midnight, coming home to crash on a mattress that sagged in the middle, my textbooks piled on the floor like bricks. I never forgot the way Dad avoided my eyes during that time, the way he would pat my shoulder awkwardly as if he knew but could not bring himself to admit the truth. He had let it happen. He had chosen silence. Back in the ballroom, my jaw tightened at the memory, the bitterness curling inside me like smoke. All those nights of exhaustion, all the years of feeling less than while Vanessa's life was paved with opportunities stolen from me. That moment in 2012 had been the first time I learned what it felt like to be discarded. But tonight, I was not that girl anymore. The laughter around me swelled, champagne glasses lifted in glittering toasts, but the sound only fueled the fire in my chest. I looked toward the head table at my mother's poised figure, and my father's quiet compliance at Vanessa basking in her perfect spotlight. For years, I had swallowed my rage, convinced myself that enduring was easier than fighting. Not anymore. I straightened, feeling the weight of the past sharpening my resolve. If they wanted to erase me from their picture-perfect story, then I would remind them who I was in the one way they could never ignore. This time I would not step aside. The memory burned into determination, steady and cold. I turned slightly, scanning the room until I spotted Emily near the side of the ballroom, her headset tucked discreetly in place, her eyes flicking toward me with quiet reassurance. She gave the smallest nod of promise that I was not alone. I drew a breath, steadying my hands. They had underestimated me once, then again and again. But tonight, on the most important stage they had ever built for Vanessa, it would not be me who was diminished. It would be them. My past had taught me the pain of being overlooked. Now it would become the fuel that lit everything they had built into flames. The ballroom air felt thick, the chandeliers glittering overhead as if mocking me. I moved toward the bar, needing a pause to steady myself, and the cool marble counter beneath my fingers grounded me. I ordered sparkling water, not trusting myself with anything stronger when I sensed someone approach. Turning slightly, I froze. Ryan Carter, the groom, stood just a foot away, his tie loosened, a crease of unease between his brows. He glanced at me with polite surprise, as if trying to place where he knew me from, then leaned an elbow on the counter. His voice was low, almost confidential. "You're Vanessa's sister, right, Lauren?" My throat tightened. "Yes." Ryan gave a small nod, then hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the crowded tables before returning to me. "Did Vanessa ever, I don't know, say anything strange to you? Anything about money or things she was hiding?" The question hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I wondered if this was some kind of trap, if Vanessa had sent him to humiliate me further. But the crease in his forehead looked too genuine, his jaw too tense. He was not performing. He was worried. I kept my face neutral, forcing myself to sip from the glass. "Vanessa keeps her own counsel," I said carefully. "She has always been private." He let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. "That is one way to put it. Every time I bring up our accounts, she changes the subject." I thought maybe she confided in you. My heart drummed faster. Ryan was opening a door I hadn't considered, a crack in the perfect image Vanessa had painted. But this wasn't the place to reveal anything. I shrugged, softening my voice. "Sorry, Ryan. She doesn't talk to me about that." His lips pressed together, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He nodded once as if filing away my answer, then downed half his whiskey in a single swallow. "If you ever hear anything, let me know." His tone was quiet, almost pleading, but before I could respond, someone clapped him on the back, calling him away. He gave me one last searching look before disappearing into the throng. I stood frozen, the words looping in my mind. Vanessa hiding money, Vanessa dodging questions. Something in my gut told me this was bigger than sibling rivalry. Emily slipped beside me just then, her headset tucked against her cheek, pretending to adjust a clipboard. She leaned in, her voice barely above the music. I heard her earlier with the planner. My eyes snapped to hers. Heard what Emily's gaze darted toward the head table. Vanessa was laughing too loudly at something a bridesmaid said, her hand wrapped around Ryan's arm like a vice. Emily continued in a whisper. They were in the staff corridor. She thought no one could hear, but she said if Ryan keeps pushing, we'll have to move the money sooner. Then she laughed. The planner didn't even know how to respond. The words sliced through me. Money. Moving it. A secret being kept from the man she was about to vow her life to. I gripped the stem of my glass tighter, trying to keep my composure as a group of guests brushed past, their perfume and cologne heavy in the air. Emily gave me a pointed look, her eyes sharp. Whatever is going on, it isn't just about you being left off the list. Her words lit a fresh fire in my chest. For years I had thought the worst they could do was erase me, strip me of chances, cast me as the invisible one. But now the cracks were showing in Vanessa's perfect facade. This wasn't just about humiliation. There was rot beneath the surface, and Ryan had already smelled it. The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade for a moment as I considered my next move. If I played this right, the truth would not only come out, it would shatter everything they thought they had secured. Vanessa thought she had locked me out, but she had no idea I was already inside, watching her castle of lies tremble. Emily's hand brushed my arm, a silent question. I nodded, faintly answering without words. I was not walking away. I was going to dig, and when the time came, I would not be the only one locked out. The clink of a spoon against crystal rang out as someone called for attention, pulling the crowd toward the head table for another toast. I let my eyes linger on my sister, her flawless smile stretched wide, her laughter ringing false. She looked untouchable, radiant under the golden lights. But now I knew there was something she feared. And if she feared it, I could use it. I set my empty glass on the bar, the stem leaving a faint circle on the marble, and straightened. The night had just shifted. It was no longer only about vengeance for me. It was about exposing her secrets before the very people she had tried to impress. As the toast ended and the applause rippled through the room, I found myself almost smiling. For the first time in years, I felt the scales tipping. Vanessa's perfect day was not as secure as she believed. It was balancing on the edge of a truth she could not control, and I was ready to give it the slightest push. I slipped away from the crowd, my pulse thrumming with a rhythm sharper than the band's trumpet. Emily was already waiting by the side corridor, her headset tilted like she had just finished giving staff instructions, but her eyes were locked on me. She jerked her head toward the service hallway. I followed without hesitation, the noise of the ballroom fading with each step. Emily whispered quickly as we walked. Do you remember Vanessa bragging about that prenup? The one Helen Carter made her sign. The memory hit me instantly like glass cutting through skin. Vanessa had sat in our parents' living room in late 2019, swirling a glass of Chardonnay, smirking that she was smarter than the lawyers. She said no piece of paper could stop her from getting what she wanted. Marilyn had laughed, Douglas had stayed quiet, and I had felt that familiar sting of being the only one unsettled. Yes, I said under my breath. I remember. Emily opened a plain door that blended into the hallway wall. Inside was the event coordination office, smaller than I expected, with file boxes stacked neatly and 2 monitors glowing on a desk. She shut the door and lowered her voice even further. I overheard the planner again. Vanessa wanted to make sure none of the Carter family had access to this office. That made me curious. My palms grew damp. What do you think we'll find? Emily leaned over the keyboard. She typed quickly, her fingers confident, and pulled up a string of recent emails. She scrolled with precision until a subject line made my stomach flip. Vanessa Mitchell. Sent last month. Recipient Claire Donovan. Emily clicked. My sister's words filled the screen. If Ryan refuses to move the assets before summer, I will proceed with divorce proceedings. He won't risk scandal with his firm. We can force him to sign under pressure. The air left my lungs in a sharp exhale. Claire Donovan was a name I hadn't heard in years. She used to work with Vanessa at a marketing agency in Atlanta before she quit, suddenly claiming burnout. Clearly, that wasn't the whole truth. I gripped the desk reading the lines over and over, making sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. Vanessa hadn't just been scheming behind Ryan's back. She had laid out her plan in black and white. She was going to corner him with the prenup, break him down, and take what she wanted. Emily's eyes flicked toward me, her voice tight. Do you understand what this means? If the Carters see this, everything changes. My chest rose and fell with each shaky breath. I thought of Helen Carter, dignified, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who had built her own security long before her son met Vanessa. She had insisted on that prenup for a reason. She had probably suspected Vanessa's ambitions from the start. I hit print before I could second-guess myself. The small machine hummed to life, spitting out the damning email onto crisp white paper. My hand trembled as I pulled it free. For years I had been dismissed, sidelined, erased from their table as if my existence was an inconvenience. Now I was holding something that made me impossible to ignore. This was not petty vengeance anymore. This was truth with the power to break their carefully constructed facade. Emily touched my arm. What are you going to do? I stared down at the paper, my heart slamming like a drum in my chest. I didn't have the full answer yet, but I knew one thing. I would not burn quietly this time. If Vanessa wanted me locked out, I would make sure she remembered exactly why she should have left that door open. The sound of laughter from the ballroom drifted faintly under the door, muffled but mocking. My sister's perfect image was still intact out there, her white dress glowing under chandeliers, her name being toasted as if she had already won. But here in my hands was the truth that could strip it all away. I folded the paper once, slid it into my clutch, and pressed the clasp shut with deliberate care. My pulse steadied, not calm, but certain. Tonight, Vanessa was not the only one with a plan. Emily straightened her eyes, questioning, but she didn't push me. She just gave a faint nod as if she already knew I was stepping into a different role now. I adjusted my dress, smoothed the fabric, and inhaled. When I stepped back into that ballroom, I would no longer be the forgotten sister. I would be the one carrying the match. The chandeliers above gleamed like 1,000 eyes, each one bearing witness to the storm churning inside me. I drifted back toward the edge of the ballroom, blending into the flow of servers carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. My hand pressed against the clutch at my side, the paper inside cutting into my palm like a hidden blade. I felt its weight, its promise, its danger. Emily followed close behind, her voice urgent but low. Lauren, you don't have to do this here. Give it to Helen. She'll make sure it doesn't get buried. I shook my head, my throat tight. If I give it only to Helen, this stays behind closed doors. Vanessa keeps her crown, the family keeps pretending, and I disappear again. Emily's lips pressed together, her eyes scanning the room nervously. Guests laughed, forks clinked against plates, waiters circled with wine. No one knew the fuse had already been lit. I caught sight of Helen across the ballroom, elegant in a navy gown that shimmered faintly under the light. She looked as if nothing could touch her, as if she had prepared her entire life to handle crises with a flick of her wrist. But what I held was not meant to be tucked away. It was meant to be seen. I remembered Vanessa's face at the entrance, that smirk when she pretended my exclusion was some harmless oversight. She had wanted me erased. Tonight I would etch my name into every whispered conversation, every gasp, every glance that followed. Emily tugged lightly on my arm. Think, Lauren. Once you do this, there is no turning back. I met her eyes, my voice steadier than I expected. That's exactly why I have to. The band softened, the chatter dimmed, and the best man rose to give his toast. All heads turned, champagne glasses lifted, a sea of expectation leaning toward the microphone. My pulse quickened. I could hear it in my ears, each beat slamming like a drum. I edged closer to the front, weaving through clusters of guests who barely noticed me. My heels clicked against the polished wood, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my chest. I could smell the roses from the towering centerpieces, the faint salt of the ocean air seeping through the open terrace doors. Everything about this night was designed for perfection. But perfection cracks easiest under pressure. Ryan's laughter broke out somewhere near the head table, deep and unguarded. Vanessa leaned into him, radiant eyes glittering with the pride of a woman who believed she had conquered the world. She had no idea the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. I paused near the bar, Emily hovering close. Her voice was almost a plea now. "If you humiliate her in front of everyone, you'll scorch yourself too." I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. Maybe. But I've been burned before. This time, I'm holding the fire. For a second, silence swept through me the way it does right before a storm breaks. I thought of every year I spent in the background, every holiday photo where I was cropped out in spirit if not in frame. Every time my mother dismissed me as difficult, every time Douglas avoided my eyes instead of standing up for me. It wasn't just tonight I was fighting for. It was every locked door, every stolen chance, every humiliation swallowed whole. The applause rippled as the best man ended his speech with a joke. Laughter swelled, glasses clinked again. I gripped the clutch harder, feeling the edge of the paper. Emily leaned in, whispering so only I could hear. "Lauren, if you're really going to do this, wait for the family speeches. That's when no one can look away." Her words settled over me like strategy instead of warning. She was right. If I stood up during the swirl of toasts, people might dismiss me as the bitter sister making a scene. But during the family speeches, when every guest's eyes were fixed on the front, silence heavy with expectation, that was when the truth would detonate. I nodded slowly, my gaze locking on the head table again. Vanessa tipped her head back, laughing at something Ryan whispered. My parents sat stiffly, Marilyn glowing with maternal pride, Douglas clapping a second too late, his smile brittle. I felt no connection to them, only distance, a chasm carved over years. The DJ announced the next transition, inviting family members to prepare for their speeches. The air shifted with anticipation, guests straightening in their chairs, servers sweeping through one last time to refill glasses. My heart steadied. This was the opening I needed. I turned to Emily, my voice quiet but resolute. "I'm not handing this to Helen, I'm handing it to the entire room." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, her face pale but resolute. "Then make it count." The clinking of silverware against glass drew the room to attention. The maid of honor rose, her voice trembling with emotion as she began to speak. Guests leaned forward, smiling, tissues already dabbing at eyes. The perfect picture of love and loyalty. I stayed near the side, every muscle tense, waiting. When she finished and the applause faded, the MC announced that Marilyn, the mother of the bride, would say a few words. My mother stood regal in her champagne-colored gown, her hand brushing Vanessa's shoulder as if bestowing a blessing. I stared, my jaw tight. I could almost hear her voice from years ago, telling me to sacrifice, to keep quiet, to stay small. Watching her beam now, her pride directed at the daughter who had stolen everything meant for me, was like watching a knife twist deeper. The room hushed for her words. Every face, every eye turned toward her. And that was when I knew. This was the moment. I slipped my hand into the clutch, fingertips brushing the paper. My breath slowed, not from fear but from clarity. I wasn't the girl left outside anymore. I wasn't the daughter overlooked, the sister sacrificed. I was the one with the truth. And I was about to let it loose. The air inside the ballroom felt charged, almost electric. I glanced once at Emily, her face taut with nerves. She gave me the faintest nod. I drew the paper out slowly, folding it against my palm. The stage was set, and I was ready to walk straight into the center of it. I stepped back into the ballroom, the buzz of voices and clinking glasses washing over me, as if nothing had happened outside those doors. Vanessa was perched beside Ryan at the head table, her face aglow under the soft lighting, laughing at something whispered in her ear. She didn't glance in my direction, but her posture was too stiff, too aware. She knew I was there. Pretending not to see me was her last little power play. I moved further and the clutch pressed tight against my ribs. Every step I took felt deliberate, measured, as though I were walking through a spotlight no one else could see. Then she appeared. My mother's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she crossed the room with a look so cold it froze the air around us. Her perfume, too strong and cloying, hit me before her words did. She leaned close, her voice a hiss that sliced through the music. "If you cause trouble tonight, do not expect to be part of this family anymore." For a moment I almost laughed. Part of this family. That phrase, so brittle, rang hollow in my ears. I thought of the locked door, the erased name from the seating chart, the way she had brushed me off earlier like a nuisance instead of a daughter. What family was I still clinging to? My pulse surged, but my voice came out even cool. Maybe I stopped being part of this family a long time ago. Her eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a hard line. She was beautiful, still the kind of woman who had always known how to command a room, but I saw the cracks there, the flicker of unease at my calmness. Before she could fire back, a presence shifted nearby. My father stood a few feet behind her, his posture uncertain, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as though anchoring himself. His eyes found mine, and for a brief second they held something I hadn't seen in years. Not dismissal, not avoidance. Something closer to regret. Maybe even guilt. It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but it left a trace like a handprint on glass. Marilyn turned to him sharp. "Douglas, say something to her." He shifted his weight, cleared his throat, but no words came. His gaze darted away down to the floor, then back up at me. His silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. That silence told me he knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to understand that I was not just the bitter daughter trying to spoil a wedding. Enough to know there were truths buried under all of Vanessa's glitter and Marilyn's control. I held his eyes steady, not pleading. I wanted him to see me, to see the woman I had become, not the girl he had failed to defend. My mother's hand landed on his arm in a grip that looked more like restraint than affection. Her smile returned thin and brittle as she lowered her voice again. "You will not embarrass us. Do you understand?" She aimed it at me, but it was Douglas who flinched. I let the quiet between us linger, then stepped back, forcing my tone into something almost casual. "Don't worry, Mom. I won't be the one doing the embarrassing tonight." Her mouth opened, but I was already moving away, the clutch pressed tighter under my arm. The music swelled again as the next toast was announced. Laughter and chatter resumed, the crowd oblivious to the small war that had just sparked in the corner of the room. But my veins thrummed with something new. Power. Not because of the paper I carried, but because for the first time in years I had seen doubt flicker in my father's eyes. That doubt mattered. I found myself near the edge of the dance floor, the chandeliers shimmering above the polished wood, reflecting the glow of candles from the tables. Vanessa caught my movement from across the room, her lips curling into the faintest smirk. She thought she had won already, that my mother's words had crushed me into silence. But she hadn't seen the way Douglas had looked at me. She hadn't noticed his hesitation, and neither of them knew what I held in my clutch. I took a slow sip of champagne from a passing tray, the bubbles sharp against my tongue. My reflection rippled faintly in the glass, pale but steady, no longer the girl waiting for approval. When I lowered the flute, I caught my father watching me again, quickly turning back when Marilyn leaned in to whisper something. His shoulders were tight, his jaw rigid, as if he were fighting an invisible restraint. The realization hit me like a sudden gust of air. He might not speak yet, but he was not fully on their side. Maybe he never had been. That sliver of possibility lodged deep inside me, steadying my resolve. If I could expose Vanessa in front of everyone, if I could prove the truth, I wouldn't be standing alone. Not anymore. I pressed the clutch tighter, my heart beating with renewed certainty. This was no longer just about revenge or humiliation. This was about being seen by the very people who had erased me. And now I knew one of them was already starting to look. The master of ceremonies lifted the microphone with a polished smile, his voice booming over the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our radiant couple, Vanessa and Ryan, for their first words together as husband and wife." The room erupted with applause. Chairs scraped against the floor as guests leaned forward, phones already raised to capture the moment. Vanessa's gown shimmered under the lights as she rose with practiced grace, her hand sliding into Ryan's. She looked every bit the perfect bride, the image she had worked so hard to craft. But my legs moved before my mind could second-guess. My heels cut across the polished floor, the noise sharp enough to turn heads. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I stepped directly into the spotlight, my clutch in hand, my pulse thundering so hard I could barely hear. I felt my mother's eyes on me like daggers, her breath catching in rage, but I didn't falter. My path was clear, and I took it. Vanessa froze mid-step, her smile stiffening, her eyes narrowing into slits of disbelief. Ryan hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. The applause dwindled to silence as I stopped just a few feet away from them. My hand trembled slightly as I pulled the folded papers from my clutch. But my voice was steady. "Mrs. Carter, this belongs to you." Gasps swept through the tables as I held the papers out. Helen Carter, elegant in navy silk, blinked up at me from her seat near the head table. Her manicured hand reached out hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether to accept them. For a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. The chandeliers glowed above, the scent of roses and champagne hung heavy in the air, and every eye in that room locked on the exchange. Helen unfolded the papers slowly, her brow furrowing as her eyes moved down the page. The silence thickened until it pressed against my chest. Then her lips parted, and in a voice sharp with disbelief, she began to read. An email from Vanessa Mitchell to Claire Donovan dated last fall. Words spilled into the air, venomous in their clarity. Plans to manipulate Ryan to find ways around the prenuptial agreement. Threats to walk away with money that was never hers. Calculated schemes spelled out in Vanessa's own words. The room went utterly still. Forks hung frozen in midair, wineglasses paused inches from lips. Even the band at the corner faltered into silence. Vanessa's smile twitched, then broke into a brittle laugh. Her hand flew to her chest as if wounded by the audacity. "That is a lie. She made that up. Lauren has always been jealous of me. Can't you see what she is trying to do?" Her voice was shrill, breaking at the edges. She turned to the crowd as if pleading with them to confirm her innocence. But Ryan was already moving. He strode forward, snatching the papers from his mother's trembling hand. His eyes scanned the words, his jaw tightening with each line. His knuckles whitened around the page, and when he looked up at Vanessa, the heat in his gaze was unmistakable. "You wrote this." His voice cracked the silence. "Tell me you didn't write this." Vanessa's face drained of color. She stammered, her laugh now hollow. "Of course not. It is fake, Ryan. You know me. She did this to destroy us." She pointed at me with a trembling finger, her composure unraveling with every word. Ryan shook his head slowly, disbelief and fury carving deep lines into his face. His voice rose, echoing across the ballroom. "You planned to cheat me. To cheat my family." The whispers erupted instantly. Guests leaned toward each other, voices hushed but urgent. I saw phones rising higher, recording, flashing red dots of video capture. The scandal was no longer confined to the walls of the ballroom. It was spreading live into the world. Helen's hand covered her mouth, her eyes locked on her son. Douglas had risen halfway out of his chair, his face pale as if torn between rage and relief. Marilyn stood frozen, her nails digging into her clutch, her face twisted with horror. Vanessa's voice pitched higher, desperate now. "Ryan, please. You cannot believe this. She forged it. She always wanted to ruin me." But Ryan's gaze never left hers. He held the paper up for everyone to see, his voice heavy with finality. "These are your words." The crowd buzzed like a hive struck with a stone. I heard someone whisper, "Scandal." Another muttered, "Lawsuit." Glass clinked as hands trembled. I stood motionless, my chest heaving, the weight of the moment pressing down like a storm. I had wanted the truth out. I had wanted her perfect facade to crumble. And now, in front of hundreds, it had. Vanessa's smile was gone. Her eyes darted wildly from her husband to her mother to the guests whose phones were aimed squarely at her. The hum of voices grew louder, a current of disbelief and judgment, until it filled the room like thunder. And I realized, standing there with the empty clutch in my hand, that the match I had carried had already touched the fuse. Marilyn lurched to her feet, her chair screeching against the marble floor. Her face was streaked with mascara, her lips trembling as she clutched at the pearls around her neck. "That is enough," she cried out, her voice cracking. "This is her wedding day. Stop humiliating her." "Lauren, how could you?" She turned toward me with wild eyes, but the strength behind her words faltered, as if even she no longer believed in the story she was telling. Vanessa stumbled toward her, clutching her mother's arm. "Mom, please, you know this isn't true. Tell them. Tell them I would never." Her words came out in gasps, frantic, but Marilyn's sobs only grew louder, less convincing with every breath. Douglas rose slowly from his chair. For the first time that night, every eye shifted toward him. His hands were braced on the table, his face drawn with years of silence that seemed to crack under the weight of the moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried through the ballroom with a firmness that made the room still. "Enough, Vanessa." She froze, her hand tightening on Marilyn's sleeve. "Dad." He straightened fully, his eyes meeting hers without wavering. "I cannot protect you anymore. I should have spoken long ago. My silence has only allowed this to grow." His voice broke slightly, but he pressed on. "This is not jealousy, not some invention. This is who you chose to become." The ballroom air shifted, heavy with the sound of his confession. The man who had always stayed in the shadows, deferring to Marilyn's sharp tongue, had finally drawn his line. Helen Carter stood now, the papers still in her hand. She scanned the crowd, then looked squarely at Vanessa. "These are authentic. My lawyers have confirmed similar correspondence before. I suspected for months, but lacked proof." Her voice was cool and steady, honed by years of wielding influence, and there was no mistaking the conviction in it. Vanessa staggered back a step, her painted smile slipping into something raw and desperate. "Number, you cannot do this. This is my life, my marriage." Ryan's laugh was sharp, bitter, filled with the kind of betrayal that no amount of excuses could soften. "Your marriage." He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out a folder, thin but deliberate, the kind of document that made the breath in the room still once more. His hands didn't shake as he held it up. "This is a divorce petition. Signed, prepared, and waiting. I hoped I would never need it. I prayed I was wrong." His voice dropped, thick with hurt. "But tonight, you proved me right." The words struck harder than any slap. Vanessa's knees buckled and she clutched the back of a chair, her knuckles white against the ivory linen. The collective gasp of the guests rippled like a wave across the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Dozens of phones captured the moment as Ryan's declaration burned the last remains of Vanessa's fairy tale into ash. Conversations broke out in urgent whispers, the sound building until it was a roar, an audience no longer under the spell of perfection but hungry for the spectacle of its collapse. Marilyn's sobs turned into wails, her hands reaching for Douglas. "Do something. Stop this. Please." But Douglas only shook his head slowly, his shoulders slumping with the weight of truth. "I will not lie for her anymore." Helen folded the papers neatly, her chin raised high as she passed them back to her son. "Your instincts were right, Ryan. We will handle this properly with the courts. But as far as tonight is concerned, this marriage is finished." Ryan turned back toward Vanessa, his expression unreadable, caught somewhere between fury and heartbreak. "You lied to me, to my family, to everyone here." His voice carried easily over the rising noise of the crowd. "This marriage ends tonight." The room erupted. Guests stood to their feet, some craning for a better view, others whispering behind their hands, the hum of gossip electric in the air. Glasses clinked against the tables as more phones lifted high, their lenses pointed like arrows at the bride crumbling before them. Vanessa let out a strangled cry. Her veil slipped over her shoulder, the diamonds on her earrings catching the light as if mocking her. She lunged forward, reaching for Ryan's arm, but he stepped back sharply, his eyes cold. Marilyn tried to shield her daughter with her body, but the damage was beyond cover. The whispers had grown into declarations, now guests murmuring words like fraud and scandal, and every syllable struck Vanessa like another stone. I stood rooted to the floor, my breath shallow, the scene unfolding exactly as I had known it would. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. It was written on the faces of every guest, reflected in every recording phone, echoing in every horrified gasp. The wedding that was meant to secure Vanessa's future had instead become the night that ended it. And as the noise swelled to fill every corner of the ballroom, I felt something inside me shift. The weight I had carried for years began to lift, not entirely gone, but cracked open as if space had been made for something new. The marriage was broken, the family was fractured, and the night that was supposed to crown Vanessa as untouchable had instead left her exposed. And I knew, watching the chaos spiral, that this was only the beginning of the reckoning still to come. Vanessa's voice tore through the ballroom, high and ragged, as she lunged toward Ryan. Her fingers grasped at his sleeve like claws, but he ripped free with a sharp jerk of his arm. "Stop this, Ryan, please." We can fix it. Her words were half scream, half sob, but he turned his back, his shoulders squared, leaving her clinging to air. The crowd had moved closer now, phones lifted, flashes of light bouncing off the chandeliers, as the nightmare became a spectacle. Snippets of whispers floated around me. Live stream. Already online. Trending. I could see the glow of screens capturing every second, the collapse of her perfect world broadcast beyond these walls before the night was even over. Marilyn's sobs cracked into something softer, a sound like defeat. She sank back into her chair, her hands trembling as she covered her face. The proud matriarch who had orchestrated this entire charade looked suddenly small, diminished under the weight of her daughter's unraveling. Then I felt a hand brush mine. I turned slightly startled and saw Douglas standing beside me. His face was pale, his eyes glassy, but there was no hesitation in the way his fingers wrapped gently around my hand. It was not the grip of control or authority, but of apology. He did not speak, but the look in his eyes was enough. Years of silence. Years of choosing the easier path. In that moment, he told me without words that he finally saw me. Vanessa caught sight of it, and her rage twisted into something unrecognizable. You. She spat the word at me, breaking away from Ryan and staggering forward, her heels slipping against the polished floor. This is your fault. You ruined everything. Her hair clung to her face in damp strands, her makeup smeared into dark rivers across her cheeks. The once pristine gown trailed dirty and wrinkled behind her as she lurched toward me. I stood still, my chin raised, my hand still locked with my father's. She came at me like a storm, but before her fingers could reach me, two members of the staff intercepted her, their arms outstretched, holding her back. She thrashed violently, her screams ripping through the noise. Let me go. I'll end this. She clawed at the air between us, her nails glinting under the lights, her voice echoing with desperation that bordered on madness. The sight of her, once the glittering bride, now reduced to a furious, collapsing figure in front of hundreds, froze the entire room. Conversations hushed again, the music silenced, leaving only the harsh sounds of her gasps and cries. I stepped forward, steady, my voice cutting through the tension, low but sharp enough for all to hear. You did this to yourself. I didn't destroy you. I only showed everyone the truth you worked so hard to hide. Her eyes widened, her body slackening for just a moment as the words sank in. Then her knees gave out, the strength pouring from her like water from a shattered glass. The staff loosened their grip as she slumped to the floor, her dress crumpled around her, the white fabric stained with spilled champagne and dust from the carpet. The guests stared, some whispering into their phones, others frozen in disbelief. I caught the glint of cameras still rolling, the humiliation captured in permanent clarity. There would be no recovery from this, no spinning it into another tale of perfection. Marilyn finally lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. Vanessa, get up, please. But her voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. Vanessa didn't move. She lay hunched against the carpet, her shoulders trembling, the weight of her downfall pressing down harder than any hands could. Douglas tightened his grip on my hand. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as a shadow behind my mother, but as a man who had finally chosen truth. His silence had always been complicity, but his touch now felt like a broken bridge being rebuilt plank by plank. Across the room, Ryan stood still, his face unreadable as he watched the woman he had almost called his wife unravel before the world. Helen remained beside him, her expression composed, but her eyes betrayed both vindication and sorrow. The ballroom, once a stage for a perfect wedding, had become an arena of ruin. Guests lingered, torn between shock and fascination, their screens glowing like fireflies in the dim light. I could hear snippets of their words. Viral already. She's finished. I drew a slow breath, my heart steady, my anger no longer burning, but cooled into something colder, sharper. This was not just revenge. This was reckoning. Vanessa lifted her head weakly, her eyes bloodshot and rimmed with black smudges. She tried to speak, but only a broken sound came out. Her lips moved again, silent this time, shaping words that never reached the air. I did not kneel down. I did not reach for her. I let the silence settle, let her sit in the mess she had created, the spotlight burning her instead of glorifying her. And as the room held its breath, I knew this night had marked more than the end of her marriage. It had marked the end of the version of my family that had always tried to bury me. The bride everyone envied was gone, and in her place lay only the wreckage she had built with her own hands. And all of them, every single witness in that room, saw it happen with their own eyes. The ballroom emptied in fragments, clusters of guests leaving with wide eyes and hurried whispers, their phones still glowing as they clutched the scandal in their hands. I slipped away quietly, the adrenaline draining from my body, until all that was left was a heavy calm. Outside, the night air was warm and humid, carrying the faint scent of salt from the ocean. Emily was waiting by the valet stand, her face soft with both pride and worry. "We did it," she said simply, and I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The valet pulled up her car, a silver sedan dusted with sea spray from the nearby shore. We slid inside, the resort's neon lights fading in the rearview mirror as she drove us out of Ocean Palm. The silence between us was steady, not uncomfortable, just full of unspoken relief. My hands were still trembling slightly, the echo of everything I had unleashed pulsing through me. Emily reached over, squeezing my knee. "You didn't just survive tonight, you ended it." We reached her apartment near Coral Gables, and she insisted I stay until I felt ready to head home. Inside, the air conditioning hummed while she poured 2 glasses of water, the ice clinking as if to remind us that the world was moving on. I sat on her couch, shoes kicked off, watching the ceiling fan whirl in slow circles. My phone buzzed on the coffee table screen, lighting up with notifications. The first was a message from my mother. It was long, broken sentences spilling across the screen. She said she was sorry, that she had only wanted to protect the family's name, that she never thought it would go so far. I stared at the words, reading them twice, 3 times, but they felt weightless. I set the phone back down without replying. Another vibration came seconds later. This time from my father, only 4 words. "I am proud of you." My chest tightened and I pressed the phone to my palm as if holding onto it would steady me. That was the message I had waited years to hear, the recognition that had been withheld through so many birthdays, holidays, and silences. Later that night, Emily brought out her laptop. She leaned against the arm of the couch, her face lit up by the screen. "You know," she said, "I have a new contract lined up in Orlando. Big project. They need someone who can manage the accounts, someone they can trust. $5,000 for 2 weeks. You'd be perfect." I blinked at her, the words settling into me like sunlight after a storm. $5,000. A new city. A clean start. I let myself imagine it for a moment, the weight of family expectations slipping off my shoulders as I stood on my own path. Emily smiled, watching me wrestle with the decision. "You deserve more than scraps of their approval, Lauren. You deserve your own life." The hours passed until dawn painted faint light across the blinds. I barely slept, but for once, I did not feel drained. When the sun broke over Miami, casting golden light across the skyline, I felt something shift. It was not joy exactly, not yet, but a release. A door opening as another one closed. That evening, I stood on Emily's balcony with a cup of coffee, the hum of traffic below mingling with the crash of waves in the distance. The city glittered in its own rhythm, indifferent to the chaos of last night. I thought about the ballroom, about Vanessa crumpled on the carpet in her ruined gown, about the look in Ryan's eyes when the truth hit him, about the trembling in my father's hand when he reached for mine. My phone buzzed again, more messages piling up, but I turned it face down on the table. The chapter with them, with her, had been written. There was nothing left to add. For years I had been told I did not belong, that I was lesser, that I was the shadow against Vanessa's glow. They locked me out of rooms, out of celebrations, out of their carefully constructed version of family. But in the end, it was not me left outside. It was her. As the lights of Miami flickered on across the horizon, I let out a breath I felt I had been holding my entire life. Vanessa thought she had locked me out of her perfect world. But it was me who had locked the door behind her, sealing shut the illusion she had built, leaving her on the other side with nothing but the wreckage. Her big day was over, mine was just beginning. If you've ever been pushed aside by family, made to feel small or invisible, I'd like to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. And if you believe in karma and justice and standing your ground when no one else will, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories where the truth finally finds its way into the light.